Hello students, hope you all are safe at home and are doing good with your studies. As you know, we have completed the chapter first of our book, that is Contemporary Global Politics. We have given you the study material, and here again, I want to give you a brief description of that chapter so that you can understand that chapter better. Before that, I will give you the meaning of the international politics, global politics, because our first book is actually the part of the subject of whole international relations. So all the students must understand the meaning of the international politics first. There are different schools of thought who have defined it, who have given the understandings of the international politics at international level. One of the schools of thought is realism, which is dominant one, and we will discuss that one. Uh, One of the theorists from the realism is Hans Morgenthau, who actually had defined international politics in simple words. He says that it is actually the power politics. He defines it that international politics means struggle for power among the nations. So, according to this realism, all the nations at the international level wants to have more and more power. The reason behind he gives to us is that it is actually the human nature which shows us that they want to have more and more at the local level, at the national level, and at the international level. So, keeping this thing in view, every nation formulates its policy so that they can secure their national interests. So, this is the meaning of international politics, or you can say international relations, that struggle for power, that every nation wants to have more and more power. That's why you might have seen that why USA and USSR wants to have more and more alliances, why they were forming more and more groups. It was because they want to have more and more power. Both were trying to have supremacy at the international level. So in this way, we can understand the meaning of international politics. Coming to the actual topic, Cold War era and non-alignment. First of all, we will see the historical background. We know the First World War got started in 1914 and it ended in 1918, in which the Central Powers got defeated by the Allied powers, and Germany was from the Central Powers side, and he was ruined drastically, and the all other European countries also got ruined. Their economies got ruined. Politically, they got ruined. So it was disastrous for the whole world. Why I have mentioned here the First World War from First World War, because it was from this World War the whole socio-economic and political structure of the world got changed. When the structure got changed, then every nation tried to have a different politics at the international level. Americans have loosened their markets in Europe. They suffered a lot because after the First World War, the Great Depression came in America because their products were not being taken by the European countries. So every country has suffered a lot. That's why I have taken it from the First World War. Then you will see the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, brought World War First to an end. The Treaty of Versailles was more disastrous for the Germany, Turkey, and other Central Powers, because according to this treaty, it's obligatory for them to give war compensation, because war was started by the Germany. So Germany was blamed to give the that you have started the war and you will have to give the compensation. Then comes the interwar years. Interwar years simply means wars between the era between the First World War and the Second World War. So it got started from here. On the one side, Americans supported the democratic countries. They supported the countries like France, England, and other countries in order to secure their market, in order to secure their own interest. Now, within the interwar years, there's a rise of Hitler. And Hitler has changed again the world of politics. With his agrarian policies, he started wars with other countries in order to get more and more territory, in order to become more and more powerful, in order to have supremacy at the world level. So, with his policies, he started the Second World War with the invasion of Poland. And at that time, most of the European states suffered a lot again, as in the initial years of the Second World War, most of the territories were taken by the Germany under the uh, chairmanship of the Hitler. So Second World War was started, and it again changed the politics of the world. Now, there was a time for the whole world how to stop Hitler from this aggrandizement. So, during the Second World War, now all the nations who suffered at the first started to make an alliance group, which we call Allied Powers. Now, Axis powers versus Allied powers. Now, Allied powers were America, USSR, UK, France, and China was from outside. So all these started war against Germany, and they defeated at the end Germany, and they then divided the Germany then between the east and the west, and they created a different type of political setup at the international level. But within the war, there was an ideological rift between the superpowers. What kind of ideological rift was there? We know the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, in which the Russians have overthrown the czars who were ruling in Russia. And after that, they made their country as a powerful country. They started taking participation in different political affairs at the international level, and they made their basis as communism. We know Lenin was the founder of the USSR. He was the revolutionary one, and who have taken the teachings from the Marxism and then applied to the conditions of the USSR. And now, even during the war, there was a rift of ideologies in 1945, in 1943-42. So this rift actually then transformed at the end into Cold War. It was the compulsion for both the powers, America as well as USSR, to come together during the Second World War. Because when enemy is one, at that time, from the other side, if there are two enemies, they became friends. That's what happened at the time of Second World War. But that ideological rivalry was there even during the war. So that is the reason why after the end of the Second World War, Cold War got started. But what happened with the powers who actually have gained from the Second World War? Both powers, US and USSR, started their policy of ideological influence on different nations of the world, and thus created a war of ideologies at the international level, which turned into a Cold War. As earlier, I have given you the definition of international politics, that it is actually the struggle for power. So here you can understand that How both these powers started now a power rivalry, a political rivalry, ideological rivalry. It was actually the struggle for power. Americans were having interest in the capitalist system. They believed that liberty and liberalism actually gives us the opportunity to gain more and more at the international level. On the other side, USSR, the communist ideology, they believe that it's through this communism that we can achieve the true democracy. Because communism always gives much more emphasis on equality. They say that it's not the freedom in which you will have hunger. They relate freedom with hunger. They say that if people are not hungry, it means they have achieved the highest type of freedom. So in this way, both the powers started their policies. They propagated their ideas of ideologies, communism and capitalism. They want to have more and more alliances. They want to have more and more groups and organizations in order to get more and more power from the different nations, so and to become a superpower at the international level. In this way, they created a different kind of political scenario at the international level, which we call today Cold War. Now, what is Cold War? In simplest terms, Cold War means war which is cold and not hot. Also, we can say war which is fought not on the battlegrounds but within the minds of men. Jawaharlal Nehru has said that it was a nerve war, a brain war, a propaganda war. Here I have mentioned the definition of KPS Menon. KPS Menon was the first Foreign Secretary of India from 1948 to 1952. He has given the definition of Cold War, which is as Cold War as world experienced it 1945 to 1990 was a war between two ideologies, capitalism and communism, two systems, bourgeois democracy and proletarian dictatorship, two states, USA and USSR. So I will make it understandable to you. Here it got started from 1945 and ended in 1990. Was a war between two ideologies. And I have made it clear to you that capitalism believes in the free market. And it becomes then easy for the capitalists to gain more and more capital. So, without taking any consideration of those sections who are being exploited, then who gets exploited sometimes consciously or subconsciously, but they don't think about that. On the other side, communism actually, the theory, the communism, the thought has been given by the Karl Marx, who is the founder of, who is actually the founder, propounder of this communist thought. It actually believes in the state ownership. It believes that everything should belong to state. Why? Because if everything belongs to state, then it will become easy for the state who are at the helm of affairs to distribute things accordingly, according to the needs and wants. So there will be no exploitation, and people will uh, people will be having same kind of availabilities there. So then two systems, bourgeois democracy and proletarian dictatorship. Marx was always using different terminologies in order to represent those classes, because he always has divided the society into two classes. And he says that it was from the ancient times, which he calls a primitive stage of the state, primitive state or primitive stage of the society. He said that there was no class. Then after that master and slave class came. That we will discuss sometime truly. Today here, I want to make it clear that what Bourdieu's class means. Bourdieu's democracy simply means a capitalist democracy, a liberal democracy. And proletarian dictatorship means workers. This was practically applied by then Lenin in USSR. Marx says that we can't achieve direct communism. We have to go through a transitional phase. That transitional phase, he says, as that is called the proletarian dictatorship. In other words, we can say socialism. Socialism actually is a transitional phase. The workers' dictatorship. They will make it understandable to the people that we are being exploited by the capitalists. So we have to unite ourselves and to overthrow the bourgeois democracy. So this was the rift between bourgeois democracy and proletarian dictatorship. And then last one is USA and USSR. And we know that United States of America versus USSR. These were two superpowers, the two blocks. They formed the two blocks. They made alliances themselves, and they created that kind of environment at the international level, which have been named as a Cold War. So Cold War was a war which was not fought on the battlegrounds, but within the minds of men. It was a war of nerves and propaganda. As you know, both the superpowers were trying to make propaganda against each other. We have seen the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin blockade, the Korean War. In all these wars, we have seen how both Americans and USSR tried to make propaganda against each other. And fortunately, it was fortune for the whole world that those tensions have not turned into actual war. For example, if you take the example of Cuban Missile Crisis, and if it would have been turned into a hot war, then today's world position would have been different. Here you can see the two blocks, Western Bloc on the one side and Eastern Bloc, Warsaw Pact, we can say. And the Western Bloc have formed that NATO alliances. They made these alliances in order to, because if you see the main principle of the NATO was that to protect all the nations. If any nation is being threatened by outsider, then all the nations, it is the responsibility of all the nations to stand against that power. So both these blocs made these military alliance groups in order to secure their position at the international level. So at the end, we will make this summation of the causes of Cold War. Both the powers struggled for the supremacy in the world after the war. Now, after the Second World War, both tried to have supremacy at the world level. So they applied different policies, they created different alliance groups, as I told earlier. So all this. Second one is ideological conflict was the main cause for the rise of Cold War. As I made it clear to you that the communism and capitalism both were against each other, and both the beliefs of both the ideologies are different. They vary. So it was a conflict was evident there. So the rise of Cold War. Another important cause was Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan. You may have seen on the study material, and there's a full description of both these topics, Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan. Actually, the President Truman has formulated this policy for the containment of the communism in different parts of the European countries. Because initial years, if you see the initial years of the Cold War, USSR was getting more benefits than the USA. And Marshall was the foreign secretary at that time, so he also used that plan in order to give aid to the European economy, European countries, because they were completely ruined by the Second World War. So in order to develop their economies so that they will not get close to the communist countries. They will not get close to the USSR. So this was the another reason that it became the cause for the Cold War. Mutual distrust even during the World War II. I have already mentioned it. I have already given you full description of it, that mutual distrust was there even during the World War II. So there was a mistrust was there, that both the powers, even they were facing the same enemy, but the ideological rift was there. Last one was secrecy of atomic bombs by the Americans uh, created hatred among the two superpowers. Now, this was the biggest reason. When Americans made their atomic weapons, they have given information to UK, but not to the USSR, even though they were in the same group. But they shared their information of nuclear weapons with France and UK, but have not given that information to USSR. And that also created suspicion even during the Second World War and after that. And when they dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, at that time, no consent was taken from the USSR. So it became the biggest cause for the Cold War. Hope you might have understood very well. Thank you.